Okay, let's dig into Jackson. But before we do that, we need to check in with our voting rights at this point because we're starting to see some changes starting right around the 1820s. So think about what the vision of the founders had for who should be voting. And we're starting to see those things change. So Kentucky ends up being the first Western state to allow non-property voters to cast their votes. So this is a huge change, and more states are going to follow suit. Some states, this is going to be the way that they entice people to move to those states, is to have more lenient voting rights. We'll see that happen with women's suffrage later down the line as well, but we're not quite there yet. So you can see we've had a lot of new states being added. So these are going to be the former Louisiana Territory. And you want more and more people to come to your territory because you get closer to that process of becoming a state. So that is kind of the name of the game here. So this is a big change. It's going to be one of the reasons that Jackson will be elected, because there are more people in the West able to cast their votes that don't necessarily own property. All right, Jackson is a hero to some, a villain to many. He's incredibly polarizing. And so when President Trump moved into the White House, one of the first portraits that he moved into the Oval Office was one of Andrew Jackson. So that's the question we're going to pose here is, let's see if we can figure out why. So what is it about Andrew Jackson that President Trump would find so appealing? He's going to be another one of these characters that is kind of full of contradictions as well, similar to Jefferson. And he's got a pretty fascinating backstory, so I think you'll enjoy it. Just a note, we've got a fluency fact bonanza coming your way. So these are all going to be covered in your asynchronous lesson for Wednesday. You're going to be taking a look at the different crises that are occurring in the Jackson administration. So nullification crisis, this is dealing with tariffs once again. The bank war, we're still fighting over the stinking bank of the United States. The second American party system, so we're going to be leaving the era of good feelings behind, and the Indian Removal Act. So those are all things that will be covered in Wednesday's assignment. Okay, so Jackson is a great figure for us because we get to weigh kind of these visions of him, and he's really encapsulating all of the change that's happening in this time period. So this is a time period that is sometimes referred to as the age of Jacksonian democracy. Now, this is a misnomer. Jackson doesn't actually have anything to do with extending democracy to more people. It's really just happening at the time that he's being elected and he is being swept into the highest office in the land. So he encapsulates this idea. He's definitely not from the Virginia dynasty. He is breaking the mold on that one in a lot of ways. He's going to be our first Western president. So, but he is going to be very effective in riding this wave of expanded democracy. You're going to see a lot of changes in terms of party politics coming in with Jackson. So a lot of changes happening under his watch. All right, so let's get to know Andrew Jackson. So he's born in 1767. Okay, so think about context, think about what's going on in that time period. He's raised very poor. There's a couple of states that kind of fight over where he was born. They want to both kind of lay claim to that. Might be North Carolina, might be Tennessee, might be Kentucky. So there's a little bit of confusion there in terms of where he was born. Important to note, a lot of people still being born at home, obviously. So no real needs for birth certificates for lots of folks. So it wouldn't be unusual for some confusion to be here, especially around the 1760s. So he's the son of immigrants. Note that you've got high numbers of German and Irish immigrants coming into the United States at this point because of the market revolution. And earlier, these opportunities to have a stake in building America, very little education. So again, going to be quite different from our Washingtons and Adams and Madisons and Monroes and all of that. His mother and brother are killed at the hands of the British invasion in 1780. So during the war, Jackson, as a child, he is taken prisoner. The British soldier that has taken him captive is trying to force him to clean his boots by licking them, and he refuses. And so that's how he gets the scars on his cheeks. The British soldier cuts him with his saber. He will basically never forgive the British for this experience. So he will always hold on to that. He was active in a lot of different duels, if you can tell from the from the meme there. He would duel at the drop of the proverbial hat. So any kind of slight, he's ready to go, and he's very good at it, except for once. He gets shot in the lung, and it stays there. The bullet stays there for the rest of his life. So kind of a tough guy for sure. He moves to Tennessee in 1788. And he will marry Miss Robards. This is going to be a complete travesty. She had been previously married. She thought that she was divorced, but she was not. So this is going to be really important in terms of issues that come up in the election, and it gets very nasty. So as a result, he is technically a bigamist. So this is a big issue here. All right, so he is a self-made man for sure. He teaches himself to read basically, and then just decides to become a lawyer, like you do. He's very successful in his law career. Becomes a plantation owner. He's a slave owner as well. He's our War of 1812 hero, Battle of New Orleans. So go back and review War of 1812 stuff if you need to there. Just remember, this is the most famous battle, and it happens technically after the war was over, but our communication was so bad that we just don't know it. So this is what catapults him to become a national figure. In 1817, he basically single-handedly invades Florida to try to claim this land for the United States. Spain was still controlling it, but kind of half-heartedly at this point. And this really makes it so that John Quincy Adams can negotiate pretty aggressively for this land. So it will speed up the acquisition of Florida in 1821. So how he embodies this era, this is the era of the market revolution, of westward movement, the expansion of slavery. So he encompasses all of those things. And of course, the growth of democracy, and that's why it kind of gets this misnomer of Jacksonian democracy. All right, let's talk elections. So these get pretty dicey, pretty controversial. So you've got the election of 1824. So he loses to John Quincy Adams in 1824, but he will come back in 1828. So he will be elected in 1828. And there's some confusion surrounding the 1824 election. So this is what is referred to later as the corrupt bargain. So the Democratic Republicans are splintering 4 ways in this election. And so the faction led by Jackson would eventually become the Democratic Party. So we tend to start the clock with the Democratic Party with the election of Jackson. So out of all these candidates in 1824, none of them receive the required amount of electoral votes. So this is our first use of the 12th Amendment. So it's going to go to the House of Representatives. And it's still a mess. So John Quincy Adams is going to receive 32% of the popular vote, and 5 states are going to end up splitting their votes. All right, so here we go. This is the kind of image that College Board loves to give us. So let's dig into this so you can see all of our candidates here. We've got Andrew Jackson. Again, look at the popular vote there, 43%. He's extremely popular, especially in the West. So he's carrying all of these pink states here. So he's quite popular. And then you've got John Quincy Adams. Okay. And so he's in these blue states here, kind of these typical Federalist leading states that you would see. And then we've got Crawford grabbing a few states here. And then we've got ever the bridesmaid, never the bride, our pal Henry Clay, with a distant tie for 3rd place with 13% of the popular vote. So he's carrying these states here. So obviously carrying his home state of Kentucky, Ohio, and Missouri. All right, so again, this is going to go to the House of Representatives. And this is just another way to see the same information here. Always fascinating to look at the electoral vote versus popular vote, and if there's any kind of differences there. All right, so again, we've got our first use of the 12th Amendment. All right, but the 12th Amendment says if that none of the candidates have the majority, only the top 3 candidates can be considered. Henry Clay is technically the 4th place candidate, so he's out. So he's not even in the running here. And so now he still holds a lot of power and a lot of weight. And so he is going to decide who to kind of throw his weight behind. And so he decides to fight for John Quincy Adams. He thinks he has the best case. He's not a fan of Andrew Jackson. And so this becomes known as the corrupt bargain. So Jackson and his supporters are screaming about this corruption that they believe has happened here. They believe there's some sort of backroom deal that has happened. This looks like a quid pro quo. You've got Henry Clay throwing his weight behind John Quincy Adams, and lo and behold, when Adams becomes president, Clay becomes his Secretary of State. So this is John Quincy Adams, definitely one of our lesser known presidents. But fun fact there, he was voted the most fit president by historians. So he walked every day, he swam in the Potomac daily. Again, he is the son of John and Abigail, Harvard-educated lawyer. He's a senator in 1802, minister to Russia in 1808, and he is there at the Treaty of Ghent in 1814 to wrap up the War of 1812. He was Monroe's Secretary of State and a key figure in the Monroe Doctrine. So hold on for that. We're going to talk more about that at a later time. He is a one-termer. Okay, so he's a one-term president. So we'll take a look at some of the highlights in a minute here. He will end up going back to the House of Representatives. So really the only president to do that, to a former president to serve in the House after his election. And he will serve in the House until his death in 1848. He really ends up dying kind of on the job. So passionate supporter of freedom of speech and universal education. So he suffers a stroke on the floor of the House of Representatives. All right, so image, we've seen this on the AP test in the past, but not too regularly. But this is, as you can see from the title, the death of John Quincy Adams. So they take him into kind of a side office here. And his final words, "This is the end of earth, I am content." All right, so as president, he's lesser known because he doesn't accomplish a whole lot. Because of Jackson and his supporters, they are just livid about this corrupt bargain. But he was proposing pretty progressive programs. So Henry Clay type of ideas here. Again, he's Secretary of State, so that's probably why. Critics are arguing that the system is unconstitutional, so we're right back to this again. He's also trying to provide more land for Native Americans in the West, but can't find enough support in Congress. This will be important later when we get to the Indian Removal Act under Jackson. He predicts that a civil war is going to break out and that a president could use war powers to stop slavery, like Lincoln attempts to do with the Emancipation Proclamation. If only it had happened a little bit sooner. So in 1828, he is going to lose, and he is going to lose big to Jackson. And he is one of only 3 presidents to not attend his successor's inauguration. So the others were John Adams and Andrew Jackson. So the election of 1828, this is where Jackson is going to be redeemed. These attacks, these campaign ads, things that are being published in newspapers are just awful. They are completely vicious. So again, he is accused of bigamy and adultery. Because his wife Rachel was still married to her previous husband when she married Andrew Jackson. She is basically going to die right after the election, so between the election and the inauguration. And Andrew Jackson will never forgive the slanderers. So he accuses them of actually killing her. So lots of mold breaking for Andrew Jackson. He's the first frontier president. He's the first president from the West. Probably has the least amount of education of any of our early presidents. So this is a big shift of power from East to West. So this is really energizing people in the Western states. So this is seen as a triumph for the common man. This is an election of personalities. There aren't too many big issues that are really driving this election. The biggest issues are really tariffs and the bank. So those become the biggest issues. So it really becomes an election of personalities. So there's Rachel on the right there. And so after she dies, he said, "I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than live in that palace in Washington." So their adopted son had died. You'll see more about him. He was an adopted Native American that Andrew Jackson came across at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. So he had died of tuberculosis. She had a heart condition. She would have today probably been diagnosed with clinical depression. And so she dies suddenly on December 22nd, 1828, most likely of a heart attack. Jackson is broken. He is just so devastated. He loved her so completely. So he has some pretty powerful statements that he makes in these surrounding days. "May God Almighty forgive her murderers, for I never can." They bury her in the gown she was to wear at the inauguration. And so her epitaph, where she is buried at the Hermitage, says, "A being so gentle and so virtuous, slander might wound, but could never dishonor." So they are buried together in Nashville. And this is a locket or a picture that Jackson almost always wore in her memory. All right, so this is what the election returns look like in 1828. So we're back to having parties here. So you can see Adams is running as a national Republican, just really taking these northeastern states, and Jackson gets the rest. So he's got 56% of the popular vote. All right, and then we get to his inauguration. We have never seen a presidential inauguration quite like this. It is just this raucous party. Anyone can come in, basically. So again, this is a victory for the common man, so they want the common man to come and attend. So people are just flooding into the White House. So we have this rendition from Margaret Smith, who was a writer. And so she's writing to a friend, ladies fainted, men were seen with bloody noses, and such a scene of confusion took place as is impossible to describe. So it is just kind of a mountain of humanity. So he is just being pressed into corners of rooms. So people are trying to touch him, and his clothes are being ripped and things like this. So trying to shake hands with him and that sort of thing. To the point where he's going to have to escape out the window. That's how full the White House is. So again, you've got people jumping out of windows to escape. I think this artist does a nice job of really showing how not into this Andrew Jackson is at this point in time. Remember that he is still mourning the death of his wife. He has delayed coming to Washington as long as possible. So again, a lot of damage happening to the White House as a result. So he's made it clear that he's going to be a very different kind of executive. There are few presidents that have really remade the office of the presidency quite like Andrew Jackson. So he sees himself as the absolute ruler of his administration's policy. He was already kind of leaning this way in terms of the way party politics are operating. It's really with Jackson that the president becomes the head of that particular party. So that's a new thing. All right, so our big question here. So does Andrew Jackson, does he have equivalence with President Trump? Okay, so let's think about what's similar. If you can think of what's similar about the election of Donald Trump that was similar to the election of Andrew Jackson. All right, so these are the parallels that I've come up with in studying both of these presidents. This is a phrase that you hear about both of them, that they're not for everybody. They are an acquired taste. Political establishments think that they shouldn't have any place in the political system. We heard that a lot, even from inside the Republican Party. You had a lot of folks like Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham speaking out about what a Trump presidency would look like, but then they end up supporting him. Same kind of thing happened with Andrew Jackson. Journalists made fun of Andrew Jackson's spelling and grammar all the time. We see that happen to President Trump as well. And so you can see this quote here, one of my favorite quotes from Andrew Jackson. It's a damn poor mind that can only think of one way to spell a word. And remembering that he was self-educated, so I think it's understandable. They're both drawing on the common man and for populist support. Both are also have strong showings in the Appalachian states, favor instinct over process, and seen as outsiders. John Quincy Adams and Hillary Clinton were both former senators who had also become secretaries of state and were running against their opponents. All right, another great one from Andrew Jackson. Again, you'll see kind of the fight that's going on here in your lesson on Wednesday, but this is about the tariff. So John C. Calhoun, who is a representative from South Carolina. So secession is being talked about with this nullification. And so he very, very upfrontly says, John Calhoun, if you secede from my nation, I will secede your head from the rest of your body. So a pretty intense fella. All right, so you'll have this in your document. So make sure that you go through that and add some notes. And this is all about the ways that Jackson is changing the presidency. Okay, so again, one of the most significant pieces of Jackson is the way that he changes the executive. It becomes a much stronger office once he's in there. So he really is asserting the power of the executive over the other two branches. Normally, if we look back to the way that the Constitution is organized, the founders had the idea that Congress was going to be the most powerful body. Then you've got the martial court and judicial rule, trying to put kind of the Supreme Court at the top of the three. And so one of the ways that Jackson is going to do this is his use of the veto. So that's definitely something you need to know about Jackson. He is going to use the presidential veto more times than all of our previous presidents combined. And he's going to get to a point where he is just really controlling Congress. And it gets to a point where Congress will come to him and say, what's the deal, AJ? Why do you keep vetoing everything? And one of the things he says is, well, if you would just bring your bill and check it with me first before you introduce them or vote on them, then it might go a little bit better for you. This is a really powerful image. You'll see more of this with your lesson on Wednesday, but definitely know this image. So this image, obviously not very nice about Andrew Jackson. So saying that he has become a dictator or a king. All right, so remind yourself of Clay's American system. This is going to be really important for your lesson on Wednesday. So remember that this is the tariff, the bank, and federal money for roads, canals, and other internal improvements. All right, so for Wednesday, you're going to be digging into 3 different crises from the Jackson administration. So the nullification crisis, again, this is dealing with tariffs in South Carolina. The bank war, we'll see Henry Clay, see if he can outmaneuver Andrew Jackson. And then you'll see Jackson's Indian policy as it is referenced at the time. So you'll be taking a look at these 3, and then the assignment you'll be doing is called a one-pager. So you'll see a document for that. And so you'll be choosing one of the events from Jackson's administration and doing a write-up on that. So you can see all of the documents and the instructions in your lesson on Wednesday.